Hello and welcome to another episode of Artist Spotlight, the podcast. I'm your host, Mitch Stringer, and this episode we have a terrific guest. My dear friend Art Wolfe is with us, and we're going to discuss his lifetime of travel with wildlife photography, cultural photography, landscape photography, and just everything that he has been doing over what is a prolific career of essentially 5 decades in the field documenting the world that we live in. Just a reminder that the podcast is brought to you by your friends at the Maryland Photography Alliance, and I encourage you to go to mdphotoalliance.org, where you can see what they have going on in terms of contests and events. There's a number of camera clubs that are all participants in the Photo Alliance, and they have a tremendous amount of information that you can learn from and meet like-minded people, get out in the field, get shooting, and build some friendships. So definitely encourage everyone to take a look at those resources. There are many, and they can be really beneficial. And so with that, I want to welcome to the podcast Art Wolfe. Art, welcome.
Thank you.
So whenever Art and I talk, either by phone or, when we get together face to face from time to time, it's not about have you done anything lately or where are you going? It's more about where did you just come from? And when you leave here, do you know all the places you're going to go? So I don't want to break the streak. So what have you most recently returned from?
Namibia. I actually got back about a week ago. I was over there for 2.5 weeks with my long-term assistant, Gabriel Chacon, as we led 10 people through the deserts of Ethiopia and on up the coast to Etosha National Park, which is in the middle of the desert, but they've got water holes which bring all these variety of wildlife during the middle of the day to drink. And so it's a great photographic opportunity in the beginning for deserts and beautiful landscapes, and then we end with an array of wildlife.
Now, I know that this sounds unbelievable, but you and I met in 2010 in New York City at the PDN Photo Expo. And then we traveled together first in 2012 when we went to Italy, when we were in Florence, and it was just an amazing landscape photography workshop. So it's hard to believe that much time has flown. Over that period of time, which now it's easy for me to mark as 12 years, at a high level, how would you say that your work has changed, either literally the way you're seeing and what you're producing, or how kind of societal factors may have impacted kind of where you can go, where you can't go, or where you want to go?
Well, that's a mouthful of a question, but I'll definitely answer the first part, and maybe you'll remind me of the second part. My work and my attitude, my intellectual capabilities all keep improving over the years. And I take on different projects to learn from those projects and to become a more nuanced and a better visual observer, which translates into better photography, quite honestly. So I basically push myself forward, and I take on projects that are very unexpected of me, simply because I know at the end of that project, I'll have learned a lot more. And let's be honest, I think that if you stagnate, writer's block is a commonly used term in the writing world, but it's no less true for artists and photographers. People tend to follow what they've had successes in, and then they stagnate after a while. They get bored because how many times can you photograph the same animal or traipse up the same trail? And so I always build in new destinations, new ideas, and new ways of seeing, just to keep me moving forward over a 5-decade career. Now, in terms of how things have changed over the years, yeah, I mean, the world, as we all know, has become smaller and more accessible. There's probably just as many conflicts as there has been in the past. And you have to navigate the world judiciously. I pay attention to the news. I read The Economist. It's incumbent on me to know that I'm not walking into a trap or a battlefield. And so that's part and parcel to world travel. I no longer just photograph in North America. The world has become my playground.
Well, and as time has gone on, aside from environmental changes, global warming, et cetera, there's so much that is changing politically and so forth. And so, are there with all the places that you sort of uncovered many years ago and made others aware, and more photographers now go there frequently, do you find yourself sort of trying to identify and see some of these further flung locations, places that maybe you haven't been before or haven't been explored very much?
Well, recall that less than 2 years ago, we joined forces and went to Bangladesh. That was a new location, and we had a great time. I mean, it had its trials and tribulations, but we got great shots and had a good time, and it was a new location. And the answer is yes. I'm finding myself going further into remote areas, but I'm no longer really identifying specific locations simply because in this world, when I first started off, I virtually knew everybody in the field that had a name or was doing work on a national level. Now there's just tens of thousands of photographers that are very good with the latest cameras. And for me, I don't want to ruin a place simply because I've noted where it was and suddenly there's a flash mob within a year, and that's in itself is not bad if the people are well behaved, but along with those numbers come people that don't quite have the sophistication, the knowledge, or the care not to ruin a place or to change a culture. And so I'm very sensitive to how fast cultures can be changed, and every time we lose a unique culture, we're diminished on a world scale. That's my belief.
Well, and talking about technology and evolution of social media and so forth, I've had conversations with photographers around my age or a bit older, and it seems as though most of the photographers that are generating what I call very thoughtful work, whether it's conservation related or it's providing background and history, a lot of those photographers are age 40, 45 plus. And I think we're seeing a lot of younger photographers who are getting into photography, but it's really a lot of times with social media as the end goal, and not the end goal being to inform and educate and provide conservation background and motivation. And I know that you're very focused on what you're doing, which makes sense. But do you see, or when you're at events, do you see or hear a lot of younger photographers entering the field, or is it kind of the same long-term, dedicated, committed photographers who are just continuing to work in the field?
I've first of all, I believe that many of my colleagues that started out with me in the late 70s or early 80s have either died, retired, or given up trying to make a living because the entire economy of being a nature or a culture or even a wildlife photographer has changed. The magazines that we used to work with are no longer in print. And yes, there's a whole group of young photographers that are seeing people like me and being inspired by photographers like Franz Lanting or Jim Brandenburg or myself, and they want to do what we do, and that's great. Everything I do is to inspire and uplift and inform my audience, and if some of those people in my audience want to do what I do, there's no reason I wouldn't encourage that. But I think it's really difficult for these young photographers to really make a living. I don't think anybody could relive the type of life that I and Franz Lanting have lived, simply because it's a different era. The way we made our living off magazine articles or books is not as successful for younger photographers these days. So yeah, they're going to the internet, they're building their social media, and they're building much bigger audiences than I did, because that wasn't where I put my energy or interest. So they've got big following, and yet what their work is often redundant or just repetitive of what we were doing 40 years ago, only they have better cameras, better technology these days, as do we. but it's really hard for them to make a real international name for themselves. They may have followers, but it's really hard for them to become internationally known and have audiences that come out and see them. I think their audiences really remain on the internet, and that's how the new world is playing out.
Yeah. Yeah, no, that makes sense. And we're also I mean it would be great if folks were there to kind of carry the torch and do a lot of the things that or try to do some of the things that you've done and kind of continue on with that. One of the things that is so incredible, in my opinion, is your recent book, Wild Lives. And what struck me, I've heard you say that a majority of the images were shot within about the last 5 years.
That's correct.
And it's, having had, decades of making pictures before that, and now having the benefit of all that experience and the benefit of technology, to be able to go and produce these images to create, in my opinion, the most comprehensive worldwide photography book. How many years was that book in the process? It's just incredible. It's an incredible book.
Thank you. I have a lot of pride in that book. And, I could have been reliant on using photos that were shot and used in previous books. I think there are a few photos in the book that have been published before, but for the most part, when I do a book, I want it to look fresh and new and not to be repetitive of successes in the past. So it's a real determined effort on my part to go out and find new subjects or find old subjects, but with better equipment. And that I love. I'm not one to sit around on a beach. I like working, period. And so I work virtually every day. And so to your question, that book's inception started about 7 years ago. And yeah, I pulled in some old favorites that had languished in the old slide files, and we rescanned them and put them through Lightroom and made them look like new, which is kind of nice. I love when a photo has not seen the light of day for 25 years and suddenly it's a double spread in a brand new book. I love that story. I'm motivated by surprising my audience, for staying active and always coming up with new ideas. For instance, when you and I went to Bangladesh, you know very well that I was working on a book that will come out in 2026 called Act of Faith. And it looks at all the world's big religions, established religions, but also voodoo, shamanism, all the crazy and interesting things that people have faith in or believe in. And so that is a book, that is a volume of work that most people that know me would not expect of me. And I love that. I always want to entertain, but also surprise my audience.
Well, just picking up on that subject of active faith, I can remember vividly assisting you in a room that was about 5 feet high, and we were surrounded by human skulls. And there was I'm going to use the term very generically, but a holy man who was seated there while I was holding like an LED light to just give a little bit of light to him, while ants were crawling around us on the floor because they had, I think, honey dripped on the skulls. Can you even explain to someone who's listening just kind of what that scene was like and the significance of that particular subject that day?
He was a sadhu. He is a holy man within the Hindu faith. He's a famous man for the fact that he will go and grab skulls out of funeral pyres and reportedly eat the flesh out of the skull. Now, as disgusting as that sounds to all of us, it's intentional. These sadhus will undergo embarrassment or shame or castigation for demonstrating to their gods that they're willing to endure all of that shame in order to reach nirvana or their form of heaven. And so other sadhus will hold one arm up for 12 years or stand on one leg for 12 years, things that are unimaginable for Western cultures. these sadhus will do in order to reach nirvana. And yeah, it's hard for me to believe. I'm not particularly a religious person. I hope I put the moniker of being spiritual over me, but I'm not religious. I don't ascribe to any of these religions. So I can navigate these things like voodoo or Islam or Judaism or Christianity without any hesitation. I don't have any predisposed prejudice against any of these religions because I don't belong in one or the other. And so I think it's been a benefit. And I don't judge this guy for what it was. He's very articulate and was telling us why he was doing it, but it was spooky and weird. And those are all the things that would make a book that much more engaging.
Yeah, absolutely. I think you said to me once that you have to take 3 flights to get anywhere interesting.
Actually, that's a John Gringo line, but I
Okay.
copied it because it makes total sense. And
It
John Gringo
does.
was an assistant of mine and a good friend of mine and a great teacher.
Yeah.
But I borrowed that phrase from him because it totally is right. You got to take 3 flights anywhere to get to someplace really good.
Well, you've traveled for decades, but for somebody who's listening, let's just say they're a hobby photographer, they like photographing nature in their environment. Maybe they drive an hour this way or that. They take pictures of, kids or grandkids or just, stuff they enjoy. So, what would you and if you were sort of pitching, if you will, the benefits of getting outside your comfort level from a photography standpoint, what do you think that people gain when they kind of broaden their horizons a little bit, whether it's in the same country they live in or going elsewhere? Could be a workshop, could be traveling on their own. What do you think that brings creatively?
Well, I think culture shock is what we're talking about. When you go to a place where the customs are totally different from what you've been exposed to, the food, even the smells are different. It stimulates your creative imagination, or at least it does for me. And so I love culture shock. I love to go to places that are startlingly different to me. And there's nothing like going to a place for the first time. Everything's new and everything is inspiring. It's harder than to go to a place that you've been 10 times or 11 and find inspiration unless you challenge yourself to see things different. And so I'm a better photographer this year than I was last year, and I'll be a better observer and therefore photographer next year. And I firmly believe that it's the intellect and the eye and the imagination that keeps evolving forward. The technique of taking a picture is there and always will be there. We'll have new cameras, but it's the imagination and the eye that makes the difference.
Yeah, I think it's just so easy to. I think if you get locked into doing things the same way you've always done them, it can be easy to lose interest. And so if you're regularly challenging yourself and you're kind of broadening yourself, then as you said, every time you go out, it's almost a new experience.
Yeah, on a related subject, I have been teaching a series of workshops throughout North America and in Havana, Cuba, called Photography as Art. And my background's painting and art education. That's what I draw from, not biology, but art and art history and fine art painting. And so I did a series of lectures based on abstract expressionism. And we go into degraded environments like Astoria, Oregon, where there's a lot of old rusting boats and things like that, old bunkers, or Detroit or Atlanta. There's a jail, abandoned jail in the middle of the town that we were photographing that. And it's finding things that look like a Jackson Pollock or a William de Kooning or a Mark Rothko, any of these abstract expressionists. And that means then people can go out in their own town, their own city, and find interesting subjects without having to spend the money. A lot of people do not have the economy to travel or the physicality to travel. And so right in their own neighborhood, they can find engaging subjects if they have the curiosity and some of the mental tools to work with. And that, I mean, listening to a lecture or reading a book on art, and they can find these famous artists and try to emulate some of their work, not copying it, but being inspired by.
Well, you and I have been a number of places where, I'm looking at portraits and environmental shots, and then I look over, and then, you're focused on the side of a rusting ship because you're seeing certain color combinations and light and shadow and you without question are the one who taught me about all of the places that you can look literally when you're standing in one spot to find images up, down, sideways, macro, and so when you walk into a scene, I know at this point it's automatic, but if you were to create almost steps for a person to follow to be in a scene and then start assessing where are the photos, where I'm at right now, where are the potential images, kind of what goes through your mind when you get out of a vehicle, you're going for a photo walk and you get somewhere and you're looking around. What's kind of going on in the computer in your mind?
Well, I have so many tools now in my toolbox, as they would say, simply because after 5 decades, you've learned a lot of lessons and you can draw upon those. So what I first and foremost am looking for something unusual in the environment. It could be a pattern, it could be textures, it could be lines, it could be color combinations. Those are things that I draw upon while looking for an engaging subject. So those are first and foremost. Then I'm also looking for things that are irregular in the environment, things that would stand out. And we could be talking about wildlife that's quite well camouflaged within the environment. So I'm looking for something that really pops out of the environment in front of me. So those are frequently relied upon visual aids for looking for a subject. It's patterns, textures, and lines. Another way of putting it, those are the elements of design. So those are the first red lights blinking in that massive environment that draws my attention to it. And then I'll go over and scrutinize whether that particular subject warrants the time. And a lot of times I'll dismiss that and move on. And I'm always amazed when I teach a workshop that people will go to the first thing that they see and try to spend 30 minutes making a great shot out of a mediocre subject rather than spending 25 minutes looking and scouring the environment until they find something good that they'll make better or great. And so I think people just assume a good photographer can make something out of nothing. But in fact, we really become very skeptical about spending the time and the energy shooting something that will never see the light of day. That comes with time. And here's another way of saying it. If I was taken to a symphony with people that are really aficionados on musical instruments and sound, they're going to pull out all sorts of instruments that they can hear individually, whereas where I would just simply hear it, but not be nearly as sophisticated in knowing what's a oboe or a flute or violin and all those kind of different instruments, because they are very well versed in music, and I'm really at this point in my career very versed in artistic visuals. And so today, it's without question, I will spend very little time looking and more time just honing it in on a subject that I've already found.
Well, no, it makes sense. I mean, I remember we were in Tuscany and there was kind of an obvious landscape image, and we took pictures of it as the clouds were starting to burn off, and it was a very nice picture. And then you basically said, okay, so we can stay here for another hour as the light continues to get worse, but there's only one photo to be made. We've made it, or we can take that additional 45 minutes and start looking for other pictures. So I think that it's experience and know-how and get the shot, but move on. I mean, I've been out in the field before where there's a lion that's sleeping, and I don't know how many pictures of a sleeping lion you need because the lion is sleeping. It's getting really warm. The lion's not going to do anything other than maybe go into the shade. So it's time to move on and look for other things. So no, I think that the more time you spend in the field, you can't help but learn from it. And just as you said, you feel you're a better photographer this year than you were last year, and you'll probably be a better one next year. And you've been doing this for the amount of time that you have. Some people who are less familiar with your work might say, how did this start all these years ago? And I think they may be interested in hearing the role that REI played in getting your work on public display all those years ago. So maybe if you can kind of share even how that came to be.
Yeah, I mean, I was quite a hustler. Right out of college, the University of Washington, I started getting approached by North Face climbing store because I had been shooting large format of the North Cascades and Mount Rainier. And so they were establishing a store in downtown Seattle, and they came my way for some kind of reason. They heard that I was a photographer. And so I thought, oh my God, this is the first time that a business was wanting to put my work on their walls for wall decor. And so with that knowledge, then I approached REI and I asked if I could hang some artwork. And they said, well, we've had that in the past, but they don't sell. I think it would be wasting your time, Art, to say yes. I said, give me a crack at it, because my background's fine art painting, and so I know how to frame and present the work, and I think it would work. So they gave me a little space, and it did work, and I started selling. So they gave me a bigger space, and eventually I had a full-time gallery in the store, and I was just fresh out of college, but it started almost from the get-go because there was nobody else really in Seattle that was doing the nature that I was doing. And that same year, I went to Washington, D.C., and got a story in National Geographic. I took a train up to Audubon in New York and got what became a long relationship with Audubon magazine. And so it speaks more volume to the fact that it wasn't that I was so great, but there were so few people doing it that they accepted story pitches. And so REI and these magazines all came together and started a livelihood. I think the very first year I grossed $6,000, and the next year it was 12,000, but I was on my way. And so, yeah, and I never looked back.
And then, over the many years, is it 110 books, or are we right around that, the number
I
that
don't
you've done?
even know. And, it's a little bit of embarrassing. I don't notch my bedposts. I don't keep track of the number of days I travel. I'm not into trying to impress people with numbers. So I don't honestly know. All I know is I work hard and I like doing books. And so the staff, my staff actually has a pretty good idea of foreign imprints and children's books and adult books. But yeah, it's somewhere up there.
So when you had the initial, these kind of commercial inroads at REI and the other entities that you started to work with, then you got involved with a program. I want to say, if I'm doing this correctly from a chronological standpoint, with Canon, and you started having a television program. Would that have been in the 80s or the 90s that you were doing? It was the Canon photo safaris.
Yeah, actually, you're wrong. It
Okay.
was Nikon that
Oh,
supported
okay.
the first 2 years.
Okay.
And I believe that would have been in the 80s. It had to have been in the 80s. And so in that program, I would take celebrities like Robert Duvall or John Denver or any of the people of that, people that had an interest in nature or photography,
Mhm.
agreed to go with me to Africa or Alaska or Peter Strauss up to British Columbia. Basically, they were my sidekick. We would talk photography, sneak up on animals, and it was fun. But after 2 years, it was like, okay, that takes up a lot of time. I've done it. And I left the show, and then Canon picked it up and went to a multi-host program. It was on ESPN Sports 2 channel. And that also, and prior to that, a local film crew the year before that happened did a film with me up in Alaska called On Location with Art Wolfe.
Mm.
And they found me because I was giving public talks in Seattle, and they heard me talk and they thought I could maybe be the host of a program. And so they produced this 1 hour program up in Alaska, which led to, and then the Discovery Channel started on TV and they were looking for content. So they bought On Location. They ran it incessantly for the first 2 years on the Discovery Channel. That led to the Safari program. And then there was different TV shows that would follow me, local news broadcasts. It's funny because I was not shy, but it was always nervous energy to get in front of the camera, and it's not a natural for most people. In fact, I think the most common fear is speaking in front of a group of peers. And I kind of gotten through that on the first year out of college when I was an art substitute teacher, which meant I never taught art, but I was just a body filling in on a sick teacher's class. But it really did break that fear of talking in front of a group of people, because I was just not that much older than the high schoolers that I was trying to control and command. And I learned that if I used my voice and inflection, they would start to listen. So that was a breakthrough for me, which allowed me then to do these TV programs. And to this day, I can get in front of 2,000 people and talk for an hour and a half without nervous. In fact, tonight, I'm going to be at the University of Washington giving a talk before the Alumni Association. So even today, I'm giving a public talk before 400 people.
So all of these the shows that you did, and just the pitching yourself, like you did with REI to get that opportunity. So then ultimately, when the timing works and you have the opportunity to do Travels to the Edge, was that just like you were ready, the opportunity came? Like, was that perfect timing, or how would you describe that? Because that's still available now on streaming media, and I think even through your website. It's just, what a phenomenal, eye-opening program. I mean, how did you receive that when that opportunity came? Because it was just an incredible
I made that
show.
opportunity happen. By that time I had a really capable staff that had worked with me for a number of years. In fact, I've got two ladies in my office that have worked independently of each other for 32 years each. Another lady has worked for me for 15 years, and a gentleman has worked for, I think, 9 or 10. Gabriel Jacan has worked with me for 32 years now, 31 years. So longevity with friends and accomplices is high motivation for me. And I also know people from when I was 5 years old. So I keep track and in touch with people. And that allows me then to travel the world. Travels to the Edge was an idea that I came up with after some of these other programs. And I had Gabrielle, and we bought a little video camera, and we went down to South Georgia Island. We went to the Amazon. We went into the Himalayas, and he videotaped me. And the work wasn't great because the camera and the sound wasn't professional, but it was enough to get Canon and Microsoft willing to ante up the money that it would take to send a crew of 4 people around the world for 2 years. And that's what we did. So it was a very forward and aggressive move on our part to try to get the funding to do the program. And after 2 years, 28 episodes, 2008 happened, and the world economy crashed, as did the money and funding for that program. But by then, I felt like, okay, I don't want to become too redundant in what I choose. And then I started working on the human canvas. Soon as the TV show ended, a new project came along, and I started off on a different journey.
Well, and the human canvas, for those who had known your work previous to that, and kind of seen you as that wildlife and landscape and cultural photographer, while maybe not a watershed moment for you, but for people who are aware of your work, they probably thought, is this the same Art Wolfe that does the bear pictures? So what was it? How long had that concept for the book been sort of stewing before you made that time commitment to make that happen, the human canvas?
It wasn't that long before it. I started even while we were doing the TV show. I started thinking it would be nice to take the human form and try to abstract it to the point where it looks like a landscape, and then take landscapes that look like they have human form and combine them into a book called The Sensuous Earth. That's the concept. And I had worked on that for a couple of years privately, using Gabrielle as a model and then other people as models. And then I saw the work of another artist that was very similar, just with the human form, but not the landscapes. And yet it was close enough that I didn't want to commit 9 more years on a project that would look derivative of somebody else's work. So I ended that and started thinking, how else can I do a human form without sounding, there's a whole genre of older men that want to photograph young women, I guess it's boudoir type of photography. I don't want anybody to ridicule me or say, oh, yeah, now art's. But I started looking at the tribal work that I was very familiar with how remote indigenous cultures adorn themselves during ceremonial occasions. And that was a way forward for me. I loved the way the Surma of Ethiopia would take the clay of the bank of a river and apply it to their bodies, their dark skin, and it was all about texture, pattern, and line. And so that became the emphasis for the human canvas, but also Vanishing Act, which was an earlier book on wildlife that's camouflaged. I used camouflage in the human canvas. I used inspiration from Keith Haring and Indonesian batiks and everything where I could draw and make a body of work that was very nuanced and different. I didn't want it to look redundant, in other words. And so I worked over 10 years with some of my staff on finding and photographing over 100 individuals. They would come in the studio, they'd undress completely naked. We would spray paint them white or black, and then I would hand paint them into elaborate backdrops that I had already created. So it was a exhausting but highly inspirational type of work for me. And the best part of it was the individuals that volunteered. Fun to work with and engaging.
Yeah, everybody seemed to be, super into it. I mean, they literally volunteered their time. They wanted to be part of the project.
Yeah, they wanted to be part of an art project. And many of them were trainers, very comfortable in their skin. Some were doctors, some were technicians, some were maitre d's. We had a variety of people in all races and all genders. And so it was just an all-encompassing body of work that came out in two different books called The Human Canvas.
So you've got the people, and as you said, they're painted and they're sort of painted generally, but then you're hand painting different designs, et cetera. And then weren't you in some cases, I want to say, on a ladder above them, so you're shooting down to kind of capture that pattern against the background?
Absolutely right. We had a camera 16 feet above, looking straight down, and then it was tethered to a laptop and strobes, and so it was all indoor studio lighting, and which I didn't have any experience with. So I enlisted people that were good at arranging strobes and all that. My part of it was conjuring up the ideas, doing sketches, and it was the concepts that I was responsible for. But it took a village to help pull it off to the point where the lighting was so good that there was no shadows, because I wanted the humans to blend in with the backdrops. So this book and this body of work wasn't really sexually charged. It was more theatrically charged. And yeah, I'm proud of the work, and I've got lifelong friends from it.
Yeah, and it's really a remarkable book. It truly is. Want to switch gears a little bit, and thinking in terms of our listeners who range everything from amateurs, hobbyists, serious hobbyists to working professionals. When you're leading workshops around the world, and you have people who are using this as an opportunity to learn, or as we kind of discussed earlier, get out of their comfort level, get out of their day to day from a photographic standpoint. Um, what what do you think, as someone leading the workshops, what are you seeing from some of these folks when they encounter scenes for the very first time? I'm thinking, as a person like that, your brain is on overdrive because there's just so much going on. And how do you see people responding to that very first moment on a safari vehicle, or that very first moment, walking through a new place? What do you see? And then kind of how do you help slow them down a little so they can actually be present in that moment and not have everything be such a jumble?
Well, I mean, you pointed out a sleeping lion earlier. And yeah, it is interesting how people, when they see a lion for the first time, or an elephant or a giraffe or whatever it may be, wherever they may be, they're going to be fixated on that animal. And so I'm not going to interfere with their enthusiasm and that first moment of seeing something that they've only seen on TV or in books. But what I like to do is teach them the anticipation of looking around, seeing if there's other animals in the environment, and being ready for change. And I can predict, for instance, if there's a sleeping lion, but there's some cubs or females coming up, there's going to be engagement, and be ready for that. And so I'm constantly looking around for other things that will change the dynamic in just a matter of moments. And I think they learn from that to anticipate and get ahead of the behavior that's about to unfold. When I teach workshops rather than photo tours, they have already gone through maybe 3 or 4 hours of lectures. So that is much more, they're much more prepped for going into an environment, whether it's Mount Rainier or Olympic Peninsula or Moab, Utah, or wherever we may take them. They're already prepped as to what to look for and maybe how to pull out some of the most artistic shots of that particular environment. And rather than shooting panoramics from viewpoints, we're going in and photographing things that may not necessarily say the American Southwest, but they're looking for reflections, they're looking for abstracts, they're looking for something that's unusual. And that's what I love to teach, is go beyond the tripod holes and the what is the term, bucket list type images, and find something that's uniquely yours, your own copyright. And that satisfaction really comes through when people start to see things and understand that way.
Well, I remember we were walking through a river in Alaska, and there was a bear in the river kind of looking around. And you said, let's just hang out here for a minute, because on the riverbank, it has a slight elevation. And I'm thinking that that bear is going to leave the river itself. It's going to go up on that bank. It's going to look for salmon. And then when it sees one, it's going to jump down on the salmon. Now, I didn't know any better, but I thought to myself, maybe that'll happen. I don't know. And sure enough, about 3 minutes later, the bear had had enough about trying to find a salmon that would swim right up to it. It gets out of the river, goes up on the riverbank, looks for a salmon. And I thought, do you know this bear, Art? Because it did exactly what you had said it might do. And I think that's just experience, is it not? Just seeing those kind of behaviors so much.
It's definitely an experience, and reading bear behavior. This past July, we were up with a group, 10 people in the field with Gabriel Jacan, and we saw a mother with 3-year-old cubs, and they were all identical. They're all blonde and very roundish. And bears come in all different sizes and looks. You can identify individual bears as a human. You could identify individual people. And their personalities are different. And so year after year, I've been doing that for 12 years now. I recognize bears from one year to another, but always there's new ones coming in. And with this group this past July, seeing where the bears were kind of wandering, and we cut through the bushes, the willows, and got ahead of them, and we're in place as the bears approached us. And we're all quiet and sitting down, and the bears came right up to us, and everybody got great shots. And the bears were totally chill because we weren't running around anxiously trying to catch up with them. We were already in place waiting for them to walk into the scene. And I think anticipation and predicting and watching bear behavior, you know what to expect. And these bears are chill anyways because they're eating salmon, they're happy, and they've long been exposed to fly fishermen in the river. So they've really reconciled what humans are, and we're not a threat to them. And so therefore you have amazing access to these, the largest of the carnivores. They, along with polar bears, are almost identical in size. And they're the top predators in their environment. And yet there's trust between human and bear. And it's a great thing to expose people for the first time.
I remember you drew the analogy that you said if you look at the face and the expression of a bear, it's not that dissimilar to a dog.
Oh my God, these bears are very different than inland grizzlies. They're like a super grizzly.
Mm-hmm.
They're actually in the grizzly family, but they are called Alaskan brown bears. Their snouts become longer because they're underwater looking for fish all the time. So their noses become longer. They're more lanky and larger, where an inland grizzly, one you would find in the Grand Tetons or Yellowstone or Glacier, are much more rounder and smaller. And their behaviors are different because they are much more likely in a situation where there's a separation of cubs divided by humans, it could lead to an attack. And that's where more bear attacks have occurred in the population of inland grizzlies than the coastal brown bears.
Yeah, yeah, no.
Abundance of food for the bears means they're much more chilled and relaxed around humans.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, yeah, no question. Yeah, when they have full bellies, they're happy.
Yeah,
Generally
full
speaking.
of blueberries at that time of the year and the sockeye salmon. And in the spring, they clam out on the coastal strip. So they get a lot of nutrients and they grow to big proportions because of that.
Yeah, yeah, no, they're incredible. Moving from wildlife to people, I know that we were in a small town in Italy, and there were some just phenomenal photographic subjects. There were some older gentlemen who were dressed just wonderfully, and you could just look at them, and they had like a history to their faces, uh, and you figured out the right way to have an approach towards them where language could be a barrier, and you just simply kind of sat in the vicinity of one and looked around, and you made some pictures, and you kind of looked at the back of your camera and saw that one of these gentlemen was kind of intrigued, and you showed him the back of your camera, and then with a gesture essentially said, would it be okay if I made a portrait of you? And he agreed. And I bring that story out because a lot of people who want to get into street photography or cultural photography, they have a real hesitancy to interact with people, to ask for permission. Language can be a barrier. So, maybe if you can kind of describe your approach to, in a very short period of time, building rapport with people so that you're someone they want to have make a picture versus kind of foisting it upon them.
I think the same, and yeah, this is an easy answer for me. And I'll start by saying I have been in really remote cultures all around the world, intentionally. But they may be remote and technologically primitive cultures, but they're modern humans and they can read you like a phone book. They can see and size you up in a nanosecond. And so if you have any ulterior motives other than engaging them, they can read that and they'll let you know fairly quickly whether it's acceptable to photograph them. And so I am a typical American. I only speak English. I can order Mexican food, but I don't have a facility for a lot of foreign language. Zero, in fact. So it's body language. You go and you smile, you show them the camera, and you kind of ask in the way you hold your head and your expression, and they know exactly what you're asking, and they can either smile and nod or shake their head. And 99% of the time, people are flattered that somebody from a different culture, different country has found them engaging enough that you want their picture. And so over the years, I have found way more people that want to be photographed or accept me photographing them than do not want. Now, it's a little more tricky in Islam with women that are all bound up, because they probably would not mind having their photos taken, but their husband would frown upon it, and they're very aware of that. And so you and I were successful occasionally in Bangladesh because the husband was right there, and we photographed both of them at one time. Then I asked if I could photograph the wife alone, all, wrapped up in her black burqa. And so that's how we got those photos. But it is body language, it's smiles. And the minute you try to sneak a photo of somebody and you're close to them, that's what generally ends up in a unhappy situation. And so there's, you can take candid shots from afar, where I'm not even seeking permission, because they're part of a bigger environment, and having them even aware that I'm taking their picture would kind of ruin the shot that I want. But when it comes to portraits or even fairly close wide angles, I want them to be aware and accepting of it. Otherwise, there's no point in shooting them, because they're going to be unhappy, and that translates into the image. And so that's how I approach it.
Well, and you've clearly traveled significantly more than I have, but in my experience, and then my experience with you in the field, I think that we have seen some cultures are very open, extremely open to being photographed, much more so than here in the U.S. And I think you and I probably posed for 200 to 300 pictures with people in Bangladesh.
Yeah, it became almost humorous, because these young men, I mean, just to give a background to what we're talking about, we were there on a Congress of Islam. And so million plus people came in from outlying areas to Dhaka, the capital of Bangladesh, for a conference. And so we photographed them from atop a building, and got an amazing shot of thousands of people praying and all of that. But then when that broke up, we went to the train station, which was open tracks. There was no building. And that's where these young men had come in from outlying villages, may never have seen a Caucasian in their life. And they all had, they all whipped out not iPhones, but their version of an iPhone. And they all wanted photos with us. And one after another would ask permission. Now, I've done that most of my life, so I hardly could refuse. And they just lined up one after another. And yeah, it seemed like hundreds. And you shot a fun little video, which you could include in the podcast. I don't know if there's video that's in this podcast other than my opening line, but I think it was so funny that we got so engaged in being photographed that a train was coming, and people at the last minute pulled us off the tracks because we were so engaged in smiling to the cameras, one after another, after another, after another.
I just remember when people were boarding the train, and when we say boarding the train, we don't necessarily mean inside the train, we mean on top of the train. But I remember that I went on this road that would take me up to a bridge overlooking the train, and all I wanted to do was get in position to get some images of this train leaving with thousands of people riding on the roof. And I'm like a salmon swimming upstream. People are trying to stop me for pictures.
Yeah.
it was unbelievable. But as you said, we are not people that Bangladeshis see very often. So it's kind of an anomaly that they want a picture of it.
Yeah. Yeah. And I started seeing that in India over the years, that once the young Indians started getting phones, they reversed the playing field, you know, rather than me asking to take their pictures, they were asking to take pictures of me. And it was just funny at first, and then it's flattering. I understand when people think enough of you that they want to put their arm around you and get a picture to show their family. It is kind of flattering that they've selected you and they want to have you as part of their memory. So I like it. I mean, I love engaging people, both taking their pictures or posing with them for another picture. It's just being human to human. And over the years, I've really come to understand that most people are the same worldwide, that they all want the same things for their life. And so that has become a lesson that I've learned in and out over the years, 5 decades of world travel.
Well, and a lot of times the places that you go to that are further afield, you're representing not only yourself, but as an American traveler, you're kind of a default ambassador
Of course you
for
are.
an American traveling. So the way you carry yourself and the way you interact will either counter opinions that people had, or it will reinforce positive opinions or create first time opinions. So, that's got to at least be a little bit on your mind, because you're kind of representing, travelers from the Western world who are coming into this new place.
Yeah, I mean, what pisses me off, quite honestly, is when I see a fellow American acting belligerently or callously around a culture. And I don't see it often, but when I do, I will admonish them because I want to be a good ambassador and I'm a positive person. So I want any kind of engagement with me at the end of which to be positive, because that's the way I'm wired and that's the way I believe we should behave. And I think you put it clearly. There's a responsibility with world travel to lead people with a positive idea, because most of the world has grown up watching American TV. And so they already have kind of a idea and they see the good and the bad of TV. You know, they're seeing, murder mysteries and arrest and all that kind of thing. So when they meet an American for the first time in a remote culture, they may be a little apprehensive, but you can turn that around really quick by engaging them, smiling, shaking their hand, or showing them photos. Those are all ways of kind of breaking through that cultural barrier.
Well, let me, I guess, take you back to kind of early days from a conservation standpoint. I know that, conservation, you were in conservation before conservation was cool, so to speak. Now it seems like everybody wants to tie themselves to conservation. And, you were involved even as a teen. You shared with me a story about how there was an area in your area of Washington State that was going to be developed, and it ended up where that was not developed. The developer actually passed away, and then I think they donated the area as a park or a reserved area for nature. And so all these years that you have been documenting, the world, and how in the case of climate change, there where there used to be ice, there's no longer ice. So, in some of these colder climates. So now here we are in 2024. What do you think, as a practical matter, that the photographer who travels around the world can actually do to help continue that conservation message, or to play a part in identifying the need for conservation?
I think unquestionably that a photo reaches a broader audience than even the written word. I think that the visual image impacts our psychology and our memory much clearer than just reading some words and digesting that. So I think a lot of my colleagues, not just me, but most of my colleagues that have international following are environmentalists and are doing a lot of projects that help to bring awareness and, in fact, raise money to preserve environments. And so I'm just one person amongst an army of photographers out there that are motivated by the environment and preserving what we love the most. And I think even if you don't have the economic means to go afield, you could find something in your own city or county that needs attention from awareness. And so with a camera in their hand, they could photograph old tires in a stream bed and bring awareness that this should be cleaned up, or they can mount a project where they bring in other volunteers. It doesn't mean you have to be a globetrotting photographer. You can find a worthwhile project in your own neighborhood. And I think that's what we bring to the table. And if people are like-minded like myself, that's a great goal to have and highly rewarding.
Well, and for people who are traveling, whether it's on a workshop with you or they're going on a trip where photography is going to be an intended part of their time there, what kind of recommendations or suggestions do you have for, how to get ready for a trip overseas or away from home? Whether it's the clothing or the gear to bring. What I know you said to me that you have a certain base set of items, clothing items, et cetera, that go with you all the time. And then you deviate a little if it's going to be real cold or real hot. But there's kind of a core of what you bring on every trip, because you get a lot of people and they say, I'm going away for 12 days to Brazil. I have no idea what to wear. I might need to bring 2 trunks of clothing because I don't know what it's going to be like. But you and I both know that would be a big mistake.
So, if people are going with me, we do furnish all that kind of information weeks and weeks in advance. And to cite a very poignant question at this point, because in a week's time, exactly a week from today, I'm on a plane down to Christchurch, South Island of New Zealand, where we're going to do back-to-back tours. And depending on when this is presented, I'll be down there during the month of October, the entire month. And it's cold down there at this time of the year. It's early spring and the South Island is far south. And so you got cooler temperatures and a high likelihood of rain half the time. So we're making sure everybody is aware. But if they're not on a tour with me, they can do their own due diligence and Google what are the temperatures like in Brazil during the month of May or whenever they're planning. Is there malaria in this area? And is it likely at this time of the year? And all those kind of things people can find now on the internet. When I first started traveling, we were reliant on faxes, which would take months going back and forth, trying to find an English speaking fixer. And a fixer is a man or a woman that lives in the country that knows how to take you where you need to go and book hotels. And that's how we would do it. A fixer is critical especially for traveling overseas. And so we always have relied on finding somebody that spoke English that knew how to help us once we land on the country. And so I don't have the time or freedom to go and learn all of this while I'm there. I land, and so time is our most valuable commodity, and I can't spend 5 days trying to figure out what I could figure out from Seattle on the internet or utilizing a fixer.
Where do you, I'm sure you've got some ideas on your list of where are some places that you'd like to travel that you haven't been to yet?
Oman, I just literally a week and a half ago flew over the empty quarter, which is southern Saudi Arabia and northern Oman, as I was landing from Johannesburg, landing into Dubai, and then 40 minutes later, catching a flight directly to Seattle. And so looking down on the empty quarter early in the morning, I saw just this sea of sand with shadows, and it was just intoxicatingly beautiful from a jet. So that is one place I really want to go. I've just identified the next 2 years of travel, which will be mounted on our website, and it's including places I've never been, like Egypt. And we'll be taking people to Mongolia, Madagascar, Borneo, a lot of our folks that have participated on international tours have done all the ones we've presented. Now we're offering new locations. And so we're getting out ahead of it this time, because normally it takes a year to fill out an international tour or destination. Typically in the past, we've only had like 5 or 6 months to plan and do it. Now we're a year and a half to 2 years in advance. We're planning these trips so people can make decisions and save money to go, or time, or whatever it takes to get them on a tour with us.
Well, as you're leading these trips and as you're going yourself, what are you seeing that the advances in the lens and the camera technology is allowing you to do either differently or better or more easily? How are you leveraging those advances in the field?
Yeah, I mean, I'm shooting shots that I could never have gotten before. Some 8 years ago, now the ISOs on cameras became high enough and good enough that we could shoot pinpointed stars. For the longest part of my career, that was just a fantasy. You would take star trails, and that meant the camera was open for 6 hours or 8 hours as Earth is spinning in space. The stars are moving across the image. So I'm keeping up with the latest technology. Canon's latest R5 plus camera is in my hands, and that technology allows me to shoot shots faster and better than ever before. But then everybody's got their version of the latest camera, and so the competition and the quality of imaging is rising worldwide, which then, to be still remain relevant in a field that's rapidly expanding, means I have to be more creative and not sit back on my laurels. And that's exactly what I do. I'm constantly trying to push myself harder than anybody would. I never enter photo contests. I'm harder on myself than anybody else would be in terms of being judged or juried or, critiqued. So I love the challenge. I love the fact that everybody's got the same equipment I do. I'm much more aggressively trying to teach myself new techniques and finding new inspiration. And I draw a lot of that from my background in art history. I might take a look at a Paul Cézanne landscape and say, I'd like to try that, but photographically. And then once I've done that, it becomes part of my repertoire. And so I've learned from teaching workshops about abstract expressionism. Cezanne was an impressionist painter in the 1800s, whereas abstract expressionists really were from the 1940s on in North America. And so all these different art movements I draw upon to find inspiration, and then it eventually becomes part of my own arsenal of images and ideas.
Well, to that point, one of the things that I've seen you do a number of times during your presentations is you might show a print, just say a Rothko print, and then next up on the screen is an image, that a photo that you made that shows that it was sort of influenced by the concepts of Rothko, and it could be any particular artist, but it just shows in real world how an understanding of these artists from many years are informing your work, and it's really dramatic when you see it presented that way.
Yeah, and I say that to a lot of my students, that take a look at a big volume on international art, and there's a lot of books on the subject, and find an artist that really speaks to you, that really that their paintings, their illustrations, their drawings look like something you would be interested in, and then try to emulate it initially, and then you naturally evolves into a style that you take on your own individual journey. And so that's what I learned when I was in fine art painting. Is the instructors would say, pick an artist, try to emulate their work, and eventually it becomes your own work, and then you evolve it into something that doesn't even look like the original inspiration, but that's how we learn.
Yeah.
And so I think that's for people that never would have the money to take a workshop from any photographer teaching. There are books out there, but there's also these ideas of learning from other artists. And the idea is not to try to be a clone of somebody else's work, but to get inspiration and evolve it into your own ideas.
Just one kind of last thought on something that I know you're very diligent on, and that is editing. A lot of times photographers, they say, either A, I have all these pictures and they only live on the hard drives of my computers. And others say, I have so many pictures, I don't know what to do with them. And I know from being with you in the field firsthand, when we get back from the field, you are in your room, your tent, your cabin, whatever it is, and you are just going through these pictures and you are classifying them, you are deleting some of them. You're very good at not letting a lot of time go by from capture to editing, and so I think you probably save yourself a heck of a lot of storage for one. But what is your philosophy on editing? Because you're very regimented from having done it over years. And what's your thought around that?
Well, I can remember the very first digital camera I got. I led a tour to Africa, and I came home with like 10 or 11,000 photos. Mm-hmm. And I brought them to the office, and they went into the main file, and they are still there because nobody in my office wants to edit my work. And so I was spending more money on adding to the main file. And I thought, okay, I'm just cheap enough not to want to keep spending money on storage units. And so rather than watching a TV show or reading a book on a long flight home from Africa or wherever, I spend it editing, and I'm ruthless because I can identify 4 or 5 photos in one sequence that are good enough and slightly different, and I'll keep those, and I'll just get rid of all the rest in that sequence because it's just weight around, it's like, what's the term of, it's like an albatross around your neck. I forget that expression. It's just useless waste of time and money. So I'm really good at culling 10,000 photos down to 500, in other words. And when you think about it, if you got 500 usable, really good photos out of 10,000, that's not bad. And it's not that there's 9,500 bad photos, but they're redundant. I'm not, at this point in my career, I'm not taking bad photos. I'm just taking still, if there's a sequence of a bird flying, you're shooting as it's flying. And invariably and always, there's going to be 1 or 2 that are the best positioning of the wings and so forth. And the rest, I don't need. And so they're gone. They never get back to Seattle.
Especially when you're having 20 to 30 frames per second.
Yeah.
They add up quickly, and you could easily have, to your point, out of 300 photos, because you were holding the shutter down over a minute's time for 10 seconds, and you have 300 photos. If you have 5 of them that you really think are telling the story, you don't need the other 295.
I can remember a trip, and I won't name the person, but we're on a boat in the Omo of Ethiopia, and a bird was flying across the Omo, and the photographer started shooting when you barely could see the bird all the way across the river until we lost. And I would say the photographer just depressed the shutter and took 100 photos. And I thought, that is a nightmare right there, to have that many that you have to edit. And if they shoot that way constantly, they're shooting so much garbage that the time taken to edit all of those is a waste of time. So even though I will shoot bursts of 5 or 10 frames, I'm not shooting 200 of a bird flying by me because it's pointless. And yet I still, at the end of a 2.5 week trip, still could have 10,000 images without question. And those generally will never see the light of day when I get to Seattle. They're gone. They're deleted, and I'm ready, because when I come back home, and this right now, as we're talking, I'm in a 7-day window between a long trip to Africa and a longer trip to New Zealand. I don't have the time to edit now that I'm home. I'm working in my garden. I'm doing talks tonight. The time I'm home, it's got to be taken up doing other things than just editing photos.
Right. And working in the garden.
And working in the garden.
Yeah.
To me, that's like the psychiatrist. I've got a Japanese style garden. I've got koi. I've got pine trees that need attention. And so I love working in the garden because it's a great way of kind of recovering from a 2-day trip home on planes.
Yep. Yeah. It's whether it's 3 flights to get somewhere interesting or it's 20 to 30 hours, it does take time to get to some of these places. Well, Art, I want to thank you very sincerely for making the time to get together and chat. And for people who are listening and they want to follow your work, they want to look into the workshops and the various books that you have, including Wild Lives, the most recent book. What's the best way for people to follow and get up to speed on what you have going on?
Come to our website. I mean, really, our website is not the best in the world, but it's not bad, and people can find out all the things we're up to. And as we find and coalesce the actual raw cost of a trip, then we'll post it. But we've got a list of locations coming up for the next 2 years, and people can sign up that they're interested to find out more. They're not putting money down. They're just saying, yeah, tell me a little more about it as you suss out all the details. And if it's something within our budget and we've always wanted to go there, we might sign up. And that's the best. And then there's all sorts of workshops that we do in North America. And I fully grew up poor. I mean, it was a post-war family. So the camera became a passport to the world for me. So I completely understand the finances of a lot of people that don't have the economic means to travel. We do a few workshops that are far less expensive. There's more people in it, but then I also have more instructors. And I cited it's the Olympic Peninsula just west of Seattle. And people learn a lot from that. There's formal lectures. And for like $1,500, they can join a workshop. And that's far cheaper than a lot of the ones we conduct around North America and certainly the international tours. So if they've always wanted to take a workshop and just meet how lovely a man I am, that's a good way to do it.
Now that sounds great. Well, I want to thank all of our listeners for joining us. As always, you can check out what I have going on the website, mitchstringerimages.com. You can also see the latest and greatest on Instagram, also Mitch Stringer Images. And until next time, I wish you great light. I wish you great shooting. We'll talk again soon.